Good morning. My name is Sanjay Ranavel, President of OESIS, joined today by our friends at 6 Seconds, Josh Friedman, co-founder and CEO of 6 Seconds. Today we are in our fourth webinar in a series discussing weighing DEI programming with the need for strategy, positioning, the implicit work that needs to be done, particularly preparing communities. Josh has written 4 articles with Michael Eatman, and we will be looking today at the 4th segment in this quadrant. And I'm just going to show you the screen while I do that. The other thing that we're going to do is we're just going to spend a little bit of time talking about the inclusion assessments, that partnership that we just announced, because there's a lot of questions that we've been getting. But here's the article. It's called "What is the Real Plan for DEI?" It's on Intrepid Ed News, and it's part 4. We're looking at this particular quadrant, which is the programming explicit side. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a highlight here, but really this is the work that everyone wants to get into immediately. And what Josh and Michael have done is look at the risks, look at what really goes into it, look at what goes before it, look at what some of the risks are. So with that, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and ask a few questions for Josh. And let me see if I can also find Michael, if he's here yet. No, he's not. So Josh, this is the meat of it, and this is what everyone wants to start with. How do you, first of all, go about making sure that they realize that this isn't the right place to start?
I don't want to say it's not the right place to start. I think the problem is if you only do this or you overemphasize this quadrant, you're going to get the situation we're seeing in a lot of schools, which is somebody's hired to come in and work on DEI. They do programming. They don't get traction. They don't get sufficient support. They feel increased isolation. They're like, where is the admin team? Where is the head? Where is the board? Why aren't we doing this together? You know, you hired me to come in and change culture and nobody's on board with me, and they leave. And I'm not blaming the DEI officer or the school. I'm saying there was a failure of change leadership and understanding of how change actually works. And so this part is very attractive because it's visible. And it's like, look, we have people saying horrible things in our school. We have people posting anonymous messages that are incredibly painful for impacting members of our communities. We're perpetuating racist, sexist, homophobic ism, and it's got to stop. We have to do something. And so, of course, our impulse as educators, as hopefully, I wish for every human being, our impulse would be to say, we've got to directly talk about this. We've got to directly work on this. And that's what this quadrant's about. So, of course, that's what we want to do. And we need this, well, if we want to embed this work in a lasting way, and we want it to change the culture of the school. We want it to change the culture of schools. We want it to change nations, change the world. It's not going to get solved by saying, okay, let's teach this class.
Got it. Welcome, Michael. Can you hear us?
Hey, Michael.
Hey, Josh. Hey, Sanjay.
Nice to have you on, Michael. Michael is a 6 Seconds partner and an independent school leader in this area. Michael, we're talking about your article, The 4th Quadrant. Josh has given us a great introduction on why this is not the place that you should generally start with and the dangers of that. Did you want to give us a kind of background, particularly on what you have seen in your work on how this is not the place to start?
And Michael, what I said is maybe it is the place to start, but it's not the place to stay if you don't want burnout.
You said it so well. And when I joined, and hello to everyone on, when I joined, I saw Josh's hands moving. So I could hear the energy around change. And if we're changing organizations with programming, the sustainability is just not, if the past has indicative of the future. It's not enough for one person or group of persons to maintain it. Because if those individuals once they get tired, you really need to be able to go back to a framework that says, okay, here's the map that tells us how to do it. I was just on a call today with some senior leaders of an organization, a predominantly white organization. And one of the big questions is, how do we do this when we're not people of color? And so I think this is an important conversation to say that because you're a person of color doesn't mean you can do this work. You may have some tremendous experiences, and we still need capacity and systems. And so I think that's really important, really this last piece of it, to say, yes, we need to teach concepts and we need to think about ethnic and cultural celebrations and awareness months, but that has to be able to filter back to a model. And so those are some of my initial thoughts as we think about this work together.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys have made the point continually over the last few weeks that this is not an end point. This is a continuing cycle that goes round and round and round, right? And but let's assume that this is the first time they've gone through this cycle, and this is the first time they've ended up in Quadrant 4. What specifically are they looking to do in terms of this? This is going back to the kind of question that probably people want to ask at the beginning without doing quadrants 1 through 3. But now that we're there, what should we be looking at specifically?
So our premise here is we've started in Quadrant 1. We've said, who do we really want to be as a school? How does equity, what kind of culture do we want to build to meet our strategy? We've gone in Quadrant 2. We've built the relational alignment. We've got our board and our leadership team and our parent leaders and student leaders. And we're saying, okay, yeah, we're going to really work together. We've gone through Quadrant 3 and we've said, okay, I have to be more ready. And now we come to Quadrant 4 with this readiness. And Michael, I'll turn it to you. What do we do now?
Well, I think some of the questions, and I don't want to get too far ahead of us, but some of the things that I think are really important are the questions to discuss. So now that we've gone through the cycle, who in the community, how are we centering voices? Because we could have gone through the cycle, but if we're not taking advantage or leveraging people with skills and knowledge in the community already, we could be missing part of the whole effort. So one of the questions is, in our various stakeholder groups, how are we centering the voices or voice of people who have this skill set? I think that's really important to keep them in the conversation.
What about the actual things you've highlighted here in terms of the key elements, Michael?
Well, I'll just speak for myself on this, Sanjay, and say learning some more vocabulary has helped me. Right? I don't think vocabulary is the solution to creating equity. But I mean, just for example, learning the word positionality helped me understand how my privilege impacts people without my intending to do that. And that there's a difference between my identity and my positionality. And just that kind of vocabulary has been really helpful for me personally. Not as the first thing that I learned, but after we went through those stages to get to that point.
Yeah. And I would agree. The ethnic, cultural, religious awareness days and months are really important. So if we're in independent schools, there's some kind of the mothership has kind of the Rolodex of things that we want to do. Something that's going to be really important is not just taking the format, is going, well, in our specific community, who are the people in our community? Because one of the challenges I've seen is we try to adopt what's happening in the country, and you don't have any of those folks in the community. And so those people in the community can get lost. So when we have the key elements of ethnic and cultural religious awareness, what does it mean? Do we want to make sure we're not doing having an event on Ramadan? Like, we want to just be aware of that, because it's easily, if it's not your ethnic or religious celebration, you might miss it. So I think getting into alignment around who's in our community, what are the things that they celebrate. Some schools have gone the route of saying, we know who's in the community just based on who they are. That practice is not a most effective practice, because it makes the assumption that you know who people are. So the affinity groups, again, if you're going to go right to that article, to have affinity groups, if I have a school that's 95% white and I have for faculty, and the 5 faculty of color, don't make the assumption that those 5 faculty of color want to lead the affinity group, but also know that we need to provide the resources to prepare people to develop that. And affinity groups are not only for people of color. So really kind of thinking about what's the capacity of your organization, what time of the year are you in? So we're in April. If you start now in April, you can't accomplish all of this because the year is going to be over in just a few minutes. So it's really taking more of an assessment of where we are and what 1 or 2 things can we do going forward into the summer. That's what I would recommend.
And then what about curriculum? And particularly, my passion, as you know, is competencies. What about student competencies and curriculum? We've had quite a lot of focus on curriculum that has been now attacked, probably because of lack of preparation on the part of a lot of people who haven't really looked at where it's coming from. Talk a little bit about that, would you?
Well, in our work together, one of the pieces that we're focused on is the intersection between social emotional learning or emotional intelligence and DEI. And I've become fond of this phrase, you can't spell equity without EQ. And so as I think about the competencies, the outcomes that children and adults need to work on equity, for example, empathy is a measurable, learnable competency. And so that's not DEI curriculum in the sense that it's not teaching about a specific culture, although one of the things that Michael and I have done in one of the courses that we teach together is we use the Ghanaian traditional symbol of a Sankofa bird, and that Akan, the Akan people, I think, Michael. But anyway, that symbol is a culturally relevant symbol that we can use to talk about empathy. And it's something I learned from Michael and has really helped my understanding of empathy. And so we can kind of bridge these things together of saying, what are the competencies we need? How do we do that in a way that brings in more cultural perspectives?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I just jumping in here personally, I totally agree with you. I think empathy and some of those other non-cognitive competencies are measurable. And the schools who are going down this path, who prepared themselves properly, are probably going to go through a curricular analysis to map the opportunities that their students will have to develop the actual measurable outcomes related to this work. Otherwise, we're still into a very kind of gray area that no one knows how they're measuring. We're almost at the halfway point. Do you want to add anything to that? Yeah.
Yes, Michael, what else?
Yeah, real quickly. So I think when we're thinking about what students need, and I think that's what we're talking about, there's lots of curriculum that are really strong. And even if you say the curriculum that we have right now, just putting on indicators of race, gender, ethnicity, those pieces allow you to have a wider perspective. But for example, organization Learning for Justice used to be Teaching for Tolerance. I mean, there are organizations that have spent dozens of years thinking about what are age appropriate levels. So I think what's equally important is figure out how comfortable are teachers delving into that, because we can have the curriculum, but if they haven't had the experience, it makes it really difficult.
They can't get